all of these services that we use, like one big problem with them is because they own your relationships, and not even the fact they could like ban you from the platform, but those relationships aren't portable, and those reputations you accrue on one platform aren't programmatically portable, makes it really hard to use those platforms to build cities. You can build like social networks, which is this like 2005 to 2020 concept that was relevant when people like, most people were living in the big cities and like working in them. But you can't make actual like sort of online cities with them because the social graph is too fragile. You can't accrue reputation, and it's not like programmatically portable. So that is a long way of like kind of getting around stuff that we're trying to do with the foundation. And what I want to make sure comes out of this talk for, we have what, like 15 odd people here. I want to make sure you guys are both able to like, if you see other people who are interested in Urbit and want to like do stuff with it, know where to direct them, which is basically to me and like Woolref Podlix, so that you can like sort of evangelize it. Because I don't want the community feeling limited by Tlon's product schedule. And also that if you want to do work for Urbit, there's multiple capacities, both programming and not, that you sort of know where to go and like the rough idea of what we're doing and like what the process is and kind of what we look for. Josh, if I'm like off anywhere, just like stop me as we go. But this part I think is like pretty straightforward.
Yep, you're good.
Okay, so there's like two big objectives of the foundation. And as I'm saying this, if I say anything that sounds at all critical of Tlon, that's completely unintentional. I think they're doing a great job. But we need to like sort of parallel organizations. So the first thing of the foundation is that it is like pretty much we have access to Tlon in terms of like talking to them about what they're going to do, so we don't step on their toes and figuring out even just learning things about the system and keeping up to date what there is. But we're completely like outside their decision-making schedule. If we want something new to happen in documentation, or if we think that X would be like really useful as like a technical thing to add to Urbit, you don't have to convince anyone except basically me and Josh. Okay. And the other thing that goes along with that, so the first objective is to get it outside of like that decision-making cycle, which is deliberative because they're an actual company that has this like kind of, flagship product plus the infrastructure that they have to do. And that definitely slows things down for the community because they don't really have the bandwidth to, incorporate outside contributors as easily as you might want. And the other thing is that Urbit has, everyone knows like the median kind of profile of people on Urbit. It's like extremely like smart, sociable, somewhat disagreeable, autodidacts, most of whom like, lift, half of whom are like Orthodox or Catholic, either have big families or are from big families, or alternatively are more in like, from a cyberpunk thing. But the main thing is that leads to a lot of people who have extremely like eclectic ideas about what they want and about what like Urbit can be because they like the freedom. But that also creates a lot of dissipation of energy, meaning that like people will kind of be really enthusiastic, come in, and then not be channeled into anything or any like overarching vision. And so I don't think it's the case as much anymore, but for a while we definitely had the issue of Tlon was great and was like, everyone was rowing in the same direction, but the outside community was producing sort of random, interesting stuff from time to time, but like nothing that built towards a cohesive vision. So the idea of the foundation and why I think Tlon gave the resources to it and why I put like sort of personal energy into it, is to stop that energy from dissipating. And so that if someone has an idea or an area of interest, make sure that like they can do that or act on that in a way that like is N+1, right? It takes where we are on Urbit right now and makes it slightly better. And that's pretty much all I think about. I think I was about 2 weeks ago, I was in the dialogues with Simfer Ritwed in Urbit community. And someone asked a question, something like, what's the wackiest hardware software idea you've had for Urbit? And my response was that like, it probably was someone in here who asked, I'm not sure. But like my response was, not only do I like not have such ideas, I get like physically uncomfortable when I hear them. because like it sort of to me feels like a dissipation of energy over like Urbit is already good and I want to make it like somewhat better so that we keep moving it forward. So I know that's like people may agree or disagree with that, but that's what's informing this. And it's extremely, if Twan feels like super practical, we probably will feel like even more practical. Because like we really like a lot of the time we'll like look at stuff and just be like, this is stupid. We should have this. A good example is like everything with like video. Like I'm gonna be frustrated until we're doing this conversation over Urbit. And I can give other examples of stuff. If we take like people who raise your hand if you've set up like an S3 integration for your Urbit. Like, okay, it's like about half the people. That's like all, the idea is like fine to like put binary data outside there, but the execution is wrong. It's not being like negotiated between Urbits. You're essentially, and this is like a great way to kind of go to RivReb's comment at the beginning in terms of what's the win of doing that. Like, right now you're negotiating with literally with like Amazon or DigitalOcean or maybe setting up your own MinIO instance and negotiating with yourself. But you're like negotiating that manually with them rather than being able to say, ship datwet has accepted me or I've paid them or we've come to some agreement, push a button, and now I'm hosted on them. Like hosting files on them. Right. And so that's like an example of something that we're working on right now as a project. And that, I won't really be satisfied until that experience is there. Okay, so that's why there's like this need for kind of what, sort of alternate development paths. In terms of like the mission and the overall vision, I think Josh has previously brought up I think most people are probably familiar with the Eric Raymond essay on like Cathedral and Bazaar and modes of like software development. So essentially you can have like a Cathedral, which is essentially a startup or a company like working very, coordinating on a product, all going to a vision. Or you can have a Bazaar, which is open source. And, people are just sort of coming together and negotiating in real time about who will do what or what little thing there is to do. And the trade-offs of those are like pretty well known in terms of like, once you have something at a later stage or the concept is known, generally bazaars work like better because you can put lots of eyeballs on the program, get a lot of people doing it for status and stuff like that. And early stage or when, the map isn't there for the territory of what X software should be, you want a Cathedral. I mean, pretty much our goal is to be the Cathedral for the bazaar. Like Urbit is like the contributor space is a bazaar. Anyone can do whatever they want. It's open source. Anyone could come to me with Twan with a random like PR and say they're doing this. And that will always be there. But what we are is we are the Cathedral for it. We have like internal processes. We talk a lot. We have an internal, both like explicit and implicit vision of the things we want to see Urbit doing that are not in Twan's roadmap. That vision is like open to being updated. If like, so for example, if someone comes and says, you know what, I can totally just, make WebRTC happen. We're extremely open to that. And we'll just like, it fits with what we want. And so we're open to like realizing we want things that we didn't know we wanted. But there is like definitely like a Cathedral aspect where our main job is to exercise taste. Taste, not in the sense of people's stuff is good or bad, but to like, just like this, we have some vision of what this is. So in terms of like concrete examples of what, how that works on a day-to-day basis, just so you guys can see what we're doing. A great example is like, let's take landscape and how should the Urbit community, especially developer community, think of landscape and interact with it. Because on the one hand, it's pretty much the only example out there of like a front end on Urbit. There's like a couple others, but right now, this will change soon, but it's the only thing people have to go to if they're like, I have all these, there's a fair amount of materials now for learning things like Gall, Hoon, stuff like that, and writing applications. But if you want to write like, a JS front end app, landscape is it. So the question kind of is like, people will go there, but the problem is landscape is a bit of a ball of mud, which is a necessary thing that happens with any application. Like if you have specific needs and like a specific context, you almost by necessity end up being like sort of a tree whose roots grow into all the cracks. Like everyone knows how this works. But that makes it not a good example for people to branch off on. Ideally, there would be like sort of, more of a contained, clean thing that they can dirty up in the particular context of an application that they have. So basically, what our job is to both like kind of see that pattern repeating over and over again, and then start saying like for our process, all right, you know what? Not only do we sort of need documentation of what, how to integrate an Urbit app with JS, we're probably going to end even like a tutorial of how to do it. We also need like sort of a canonical tight little like app that we can point people to. And so right now we're, working actively on that, both in terms of the tutorial aspect, and then also Radver Sivmas is doing a lot of work kind of pulling landscape apart into like little packages. And then once we have on the API side, and then once we have that, we'll go ahead and figure out what the best way is to combine those into like just like a simple app that we can show to the community. Anyone here who's good at or interested in front end, like front end is like one of our biggest like needs, for the simple reason that a lot of the stuff people want to do on Urbit right now, especially on the social side, it's not that hard to do on the Hoon side with like Graph Store, which is another thing we're like putting out there. But we need like front end developers is like one of the biggest bottlenecks for obvious reasons. And then once we do find them, we have to make sure we put them on the right stuff. So that goes to when we're talking, I think it's probably implicit in this discussion. But one of the biggest focuses of what we're trying to do, and I think if anyone here is considering proposing projects or participating in them or wants to tell other people about the possibility, the biggest focus here is on capital goods. Okay, we want to focus on making goods or making things in Urbit that make it easier to make other things. So it doesn't matter how cool something is as a project, if it doesn't make it easier for people to, I guess I would say easier for people to use Urbit, easier especially for people to program on it. Those are the criteria that we have to meet. Like the stuff has to be a capital good. If something is like a really cool, social app and it's likely to like get more people using Urbit and having interactions there, that's actually like a capital good because like, things will come out of that. But that's the general heuristic of everything that we're focusing on, and that kind of keeps me up at night is, how can we make something that will like make it easier for us to do it. And I also think that incidentally, if you're kind of wondering about how to talk to people about Urbit, I think there's some analogies between, Urbit's phases and the phases of something like Bitcoin. So if you take, Bitcoin in like 2010 or 2011, it's like a fun thing to like play around with and like sort of understand the mechanics of it with other like-minded people. If you take it in like, 2013, it's like a really good way to buy drugs. If you take it in 2017, it's a really good way to, to speculate, right? Like it's a really good sort of on-ramp to, trying to like, pump stuff and trade in like ICOs. If you take it in 2021, it's, better than gold. And people like at each phase will try to like decide what it is and figure out what it is. And, it mostly goes around various narratives like that. And at each phase, they're right. Like, so if someone comes to Urbit in 2021 and tries to use it as like, the best platform for buying drugs, I mean, not Urbit, Bitcoin, maybe Urbit, they're likely to be like disappointed to some degree. It's, not as great for that function as it was then because of things like transaction costs, increased analysis of the chain, stuff like that. Similarly, I would say what Urbit was good for a year ago, 2 years ago, was being a thing that you could work on if you were interested in the concept of Urbit, unless you were Minder Folden, like the Urbit user, who was like single-handedly keeping engagement afloat. The thing you could do on Urbit was like build Urbit outside of Urbit for the most part. Like you let's be realistic. You could chat inside it, but like the chat like latency was like 20 or 30 seconds. So it, that limits the kinds of interactions you can have. If you come to it now, it's a good place right now to hang out with people who want to develop Urbit further, I would say. I know there are some communities I participate and like run some that are probably a little bit outside of that and hit the use case of like, it's a good place to talk about, your objectionable political ideas without like worrying that you'll like lose your account basically. Or someone will see it, right? So there is like that use case for sure. But the main use case right now, even inside those those communities, is basically people who want to live inside Urbit while building Urbit, right? That's where we're at right now, and why there's such a focus on things like capital goods, because that's the only way we can achieve like escape velocity out of this phase, is if we like relentlessly build useful capital goods until we're at a phase where, and it's not that far away, where it just clicks and enough stuff is there where people are like, you know what, I sort of don't need to go to Twitter anymore, or this is actually like a better email system, or I can run my entire, group or company, 10-person company inside Urbit video chats and like, Urbit email, stuff like that. So getting from here to there is a big focus of ours, because while Tron is focused on that, their bandwidth is limited. And it's also a lot of the part of Urbit that's like definitely going to work at this point is, pretty rapid server to server communication for text and coordinating server to server for like binary data. Like that's gonna work, and we're, gonna make it happen. The part that's still experimental that we don't know yet is what types of social apps like will there be on Urbit. Probably will be like poured over a lot of them and figure out, how will you search that? What uses of your own data will emerge once it's all in one place. And I think we need like pretty rapid experimentation and frequent to get there, right? And so if we just limit ourselves to kind of, essentially everyone like either waiting for Tlon products or working for Tlon, we're not going to push that as far as we can. Not least for the reason that it's hard to do that if you have a day job, right? So like another thing we want to focus on is making sure that people have stuff they can usefully do during day jobs while still progressing to something, and kind of having a hive mind, or not even a hive mind, like overlords on top of that who keep some institutional knowledge and like know what's going on. Let me take like a quick break there before I go to examples of like, stuff that we're working on right now and plans for contributors. Does anyone have any like points or questions or things they think are stupid and wrong? All right.
Sorry. Hi.
Hey.
Just wondering. So the definition of capital good here seems like it could become a moving target, right? Or so it's
yeah. Tell me exactly what you mean. What you mean?
Operationalize that heuristic through the stages.
Yeah. Can you explain to me exactly what you say moving target? I guess you're saying that I could see something and then kind of like justify to myself that like, oh, actually this will like bring more people on Urbit, or like if I put like a cool thing out there, it'll attract interest, like more interest to the platform. Like it doesn't sound very rigorous, right?
And you might be right if you do that, maybe.
Yeah. No. Like, yeah, absolutely. So I think that you're right that it's a moving target. It would not work well as like a rule to give to a subordinate. Okay, so I think there's like when we think about like rules and heuristics, there's two different kinds. And anyone who's like both like kind of worked on their own to do stuff or manage people kind of gets them pretty easily. Which is, one is this like set of instructions that you give to a potentially smart subordinate, but like so that they don't mess the thing up or so that it gets done. And that would be, and this like sort of make capital goods would be a terrible, terrible heuristic in that way. Right. If I like got a new employee, like someone who's like very competent and like bright, but like they're pretty much there to work from 9 to 5, right? And just get stuff done that's given. And I say that, they might even resonate with it or like care about it, but they're not invested in it, and it's going to deteriorate, and it will absolutely become a moving target, and they'll probably start to think of it in terms of like, I want to do this because it's like pretty easy, like, and I'm pretty sure I can justify it to boss as a capital good, right? Like I think that's like roughly what you're one big failure mode there. The other mode is when you're trying to like keep yourself on target and to psych up yourself and other peers. Okay, so there's this it's really important, and this is like one thing we need to get better at doing online that we haven't fully explored, but it's a lot easier to get people kind of psyched and energized in person. And I'm like a super like online virtual maximalist. Like most of my life is online. Like my physical life that's not online is literally just me with like my wife and my son, like barely even friends. But it's undeniable that humans, as of right now, are better at transmitting energy in person. Okay. So what we have to do to overcome that is like, you kind of have to like be even more energetic and focused in an online context, and make sure you have all these little kind of tidbits that you can give to people to get them like really psyched. So I think if someone is like, when we think of it that way, if someone comes into the foundation and wants to do stuff and they have an idea for, I want to give examples, but they'll be specific, which is mean, so I can't give them, but they want to make a thing that's like very cool but not useful, and that seems much more motivating to them than like doing the documentation for how to do threads in Urbit, right? Which like right now is like kind of thin and okay, and you can get it if you go there and then talk to some people in Hooniverse, and that's not as scalable as it should be. So out of those two things, which one would take more effort, and which one would have bigger impact? I think it's pretty obvious that like the person who writes the thread guide is going to do less work and have more of an impact, because people in Urbit are so autodidactic in general, like the current user base, that like you'll probably get literally over 100 extremely smart people knowing how to use them just because your page is there for them to browse in the toilet. While they're like, thinking about Urbit one day and are like, oh, I want to understand threads. And they go through it and they're like, oh, not only do I like grok this better now, but I also know I can go back here once I'm home and have some time at the computer and kind of play with it in the dojo. We'll ref go.
Yeah, just to lend some color here. I think, we like to encourage development of things that are going to improve the ecosystem of things that can be developed with, is maybe how you might think about a capital good. But we weigh that against the enthusiasm that someone has for the thing they're trying to do. We have a range of people that come at us with different ideas. Sometimes someone has an idea and they're like, I just want to work on Urbit, and this is the first idea I had. And we're like, great. How can we work with you to figure out like what the most valuable thing is that you can do right now? Other times people come at us with, I have a highly specific idea. I'm an expert on this. I really want to do this thing. I don't care how useful it is. We're like, great. Okay, you should do that then, because that's what you want to do and that's what you're pumped to do. So it varies a lot, but we do. And how do we figure out what that moving target is? Because it is a moving target. What is a capital good today? Well, that may be different than it is next year, right? We just have to talk about it. And we're working on this. Like, we need to publish, hey, this is what we're thinking is going to be valuable for the Urbit community. Let's have a dialogue about it and make sure that we at least have the information out there. This could be better. The foundation group, if you're not in that, you should DM Timurai. We can get you in there.
Yeah.
Or Mike.
We just made it private, not to make it. In this case, there's a lot of stuff on Urbit that's private because it's exclusive. This is private because like it seemed to like just add something if people had to put a little bit of effort into sort of asking to be there. Otherwise, it was deteriorating into like people saying their gripes about Hoon, but it's very open, and we're welcome to have people in there.
Yeah, but that's a good place to get in and conversation.
Thank you for unpacking that. I think that's very helpful. I definitely agree that I think the example of documentation as one of the primary capital goods is a very good one, and I definitely think that the value of that cannot be understated, as I think some of the contributors here have.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, I'm like, I'm a fan of people making documentation and also like the final kind of point I wanted to emphasize there is that when you have that narrative of like, we're making things that let us make the ecosystem, or we're building capital goods, or whatever you want to call it, that lets you further energize the person who's going to be doing that documentation. It makes it a lot more interesting. Like, I'll just say for my part, one of my favorite things about having done the Gall guide is that people learn Hoon better now. Like, it's like easier, and we literally we put so much effort into things like Hoon School, Hooniversity, and making that better. And we're like, how do we reach these kids? How can we get them to understand Hoon? And like, it turned out that like there was a lot of impact from just making it putting in like a practical context. And I think there's other unwritten parts of the current documentation that will achieve that. So the big thing is like getting that person like energized and to the point like that they're doing something even more useful and more effective, that's going to have like people even like probably telling them, oh yeah, I like looked at your guide and like I use that for not having to use a JS proxy to chain together like HTTP calls or something, because I can do it with threads now, something like that. So that's that part. That was a great question, because I think what it illustrates is the importance of, from the foundation, of applying taste. There's no like hard rules we can use. We have to have taste for how we're going to do this, and part of that taste is like communicating in the foundation chat and talking to like people and incorporating that and figuring out where we're at. And then part of it is like just a little bit idiosyncratic, but yeah.
So yeah, thank you very much to both of you for answering so comprehensively. I want to push one step further, one iteration further, and this is probably has probably been raised before, but it's my first time. So so the idea of like let's to throw out another buzzword about killer app, kind of like making people see or that this is actually useful for something. So kind of the to me personally, the kind of the foundational, theoretical, abstract things are very appealing. At the same time, I know that there are many people who are motivated to become engaged only once they've seen the workflow or whatever, something specific. So I don't know, how does that look like in your map of stages forward and where we are now?
Yeah, so there's what it looks like and then what it feels like to me like at night. So I like literally like wake up at night sometimes talking in my sleep about like how I can like make Urbit better. And like what I mean practically is that I can see a lot of things that would provide that for people, and I can also see how we can get there, and I can also see that it's like a fair amount of work. So there's like, in terms of the main weakness in Urbit right now is that we have not replicated yet enough proven modes of interaction. Like right now, we've replicated chat and like sort of blogs, but not really, because of some of the limitations of groups. So basically, we've like replicated chat in an Urbit context where you can like do really good things with different archipelagos and groups and stuff like that. That's good, but that's like a pretty like limited mode of interaction, and it's only one of many forms of interaction that have like proven themselves over the last like 40 years. You can put them into categories pretty easily, but like kind of forum, popularity contest like Reddit, emails, a feed, Feed is coming from Tlon pretty soon, by the way, like in this cycle in a few weeks. But I'm trying to get back to what your overall question was, which is how we can kind of get more people on here and kind of prove that value. And the way we can do it is by saying, okay, what's the next mode of interaction that we can bring to Urbit? Because once enough of them are there, they're useful on their own, but Urbit makes it also a lot easier to like both connect them on the back end and do things like, search across all your different like chats, which is something I'm really interested in. But anyway, point is, we want to target what's a mode of interaction we can bring to Urbit. So we were talking earlier about bringing like, video and audio. That's one. Another one that needs to be here is like feeds and posts. That's coming. Another one that we need, but that we don't have and don't yet have a proposal for, is something like, an Urbit style forum. I would say like that kind of mode where you have longer lasting content, maybe limited by a group, or maybe you say like, each forum is like for a certain group, whatever. We need that, and we don't have it, and we don't have a proposal for it. So then what we say is, okay, why don't we have a proposal for this? Is it because I haven't written a proposal, and if I did, someone would just be able to come and do it? Or is it because if that person even was interested and came, they wouldn't be able to easily get up to speed on GraphStore, right? And how to like, GraphStore is very cool and pretty elegant, but it takes a little bit of getting up to speed. And so we have to evaluate that. Then we also have to evaluate, okay, if that person or someone working with them then wants to build an interface, is that going to be blocked in any way? And we're like, yeah, actually it is going to be kind of blocked, because as we talked about earlier in this talk, we don't have like, a good like model app that they can build off and then let it dirtify, right? So that immediately brings to, if you look at some of our proposals that are like sort of bounties that are being like worked on right now, or people who contribute in sort of a non-bounty form, we have like Radber Sidmus and Rabsef Bikram working on both like cleaning and like pulling out the JS API for landscape into smaller modules that we can then make apps. Having Rabsef make sort of canonical documentation of how you would integrate that with the JSON backend on Hoon. And then we have like Sipfine Fidmex working on a bounty where the first parts of it should be out in a week or two, to both explain and then give how-tos for using GraphStore in practice. And then at that point, simultaneously, I'm working on writing like a couple different bounties for Urbit forum, Urbit email. Some like I want to, probably like I think the community should produce soon like a photo gallery, music, or maybe like music sharing. And so I'm writing those simultaneously, since I know that like as those other pieces are being worked on, I have something that I can target on like a 2-week time frame to have hit there. Then what that leads to is somewhere probably 2 to 4 weeks from now, someone will probably start working on that like thing like Urbit forum, music like gallery or sharing, things on those lines, and we get closer to basically being able to show let our current users feel those experiences and use them, and then also of course like when someone's onboarded, have like a cooler thing to show them to do. But does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, I think there were a lot of details there that I'm not yet familiar with, or references, but
actually, I think I probably know which ones. I'll let you 1 sec, Josh. I think I probably know which ones those are. Which is one like what is GraphStore? It's basically Urbit's native database for storing social data. It's pretty good at representing like things like posts with threaded replies or revisions, or most of what we do on social. It's good for that. When I talk about the JS API, I just mean like there's literally just people will just ask like, okay, I'm a front end developer. How can I make my like JavaScript React app talk to Urbit? Which is when you're using landscape, you're using a JavaScript app that's talking to Urbit as kind of its back end, the way that Twitter has like its front end JS, and then it talks to the Twitter servers. Yours is talking to the Urbit server.
All right, yeah, I understand that.
Josh, you have hand raised?
Yeah.
was just going to mention, I think you kind of talked about like, and I think you got at this, Tim, through example, but there's really there's maybe two ways we could talk about Urbit, or we could do documentation on it. It's one, the sort of kernel space, low-level workings of how Urbit actually functions, the very high-level picture, the very low-level picture of what Urbit is. And then there's also this sort of hands-on, let's show you how to build stuff with it right now. And different people are drawn to those different things.
Yeah.
I'd say we're fairly good on the part about telling you about how Urbit really works. It's not complete, but we have a lot of material on the inner workings. We're not very good on the let's show you how to build something now in a very hands-on approach. So Tim is very much trying to fill that gap, as evidenced by the two things that you originally wrote, Knock for Everyday Coders and The Complete Guide to All, which is like, let's show you how to build an application.
Yeah.
We're trying to balance that out a little bit, so we have a bit of both.
Yeah, and as it like, there's a lot to it, but basically, like, you know, sort of building everyday things, like, mostly comes down to like having good models for like cargo culting, because like everybody, even like the very best developers, especially when you're talking about kind of building really practical things, they want to take like existing code or, you know, their own code half the time and just like port it to like the new project and have like a way to start up, and we're not good enough at that right now. So just more cargo culting, less thinking. That's the dream. I have Robert.
Yeah, so one thing in relation to what you're saying right now is in your examples, you're more focused, well, you more referenced the JavaScript target.
Yeah.
And so now we have a lot of airlock crates. And so I'm just thinking, related to your previous comments about also, you know, we don't want landscape to be this amazing or, you know, this big ball of mud that keeps growing.
Yeah.
So then has there been much thought about the future potential for, say, like a standard for connecting to a ship, even like some of these basic primitives, or like, you know, are we going to have some sort of YAML file or something that's kind of the default? So then someone, you know, we just every single airlock parses that, even for mobile maybe. And so I was just thinking, what are some of your thoughts in terms of the basic primitives for not just JavaScript apps, but we can actually have this, you know, all kinds of apps, but also in regards to the actual apps, what do you think past JavaScript for like a native desktop app, a native mobile app, what are kind of the future of airlocks in terms of use cases? And so like from a technical perspective and a use case perspective, where do you see that all going?
Yeah, so in terms of where I see it, first of all, like my next like note under like good things to highlight from the community so far is like the stuff you've done with like Rust airlocks, and showing people practically like in chat like how they can like just completely permissionlessly bypass all of the both like interface and development cycle and just build stuff that like accesses their Urbit right now and like does stuff to the data. That's Everyone knew you could do that, but that's like really, really useful for people to see because it starts making stuff like potentially like Urbit search feeling like more real, stuff like that. And there's like I think that the amount of services that can and should be built that are purely in that kind of style of like not even an interface accessing it, but just doing stuff to your backend thing and running stuff there, like that's the stuff I like. And that's like some of the coolest stuff like that there is. And that's the easiest to do permissionlessly. So I think that then leads into we basically then need to evaluate how much of it like is the bigger immediate win from standardizing that approach across languages with like a configuration file or something, or is it from like, you know, getting multiple like contributors working on like a further suite of backend you know, data munging like projects based on like, let's say the Rust airlock, like getting Rust airlock, like I think like DPC doesn't seem to post anymore, but he's like a big Ruster who doesn't like food, and this would have like inspired him heavily and probably got him like working a lot in his like spare time. So yeah, I think my answer is I probably should put that out there as a thing we're like actively looking for. But okay, here's the flow. I think the best is I want to at least make sure that we can standardize JavaScript access. Once we have that, I absolutely agree, and it's not that long. We're talking like a couple of weeks kind of thing. We should probably put a bounty out there for like doing something like that across a couple other languages that that have interfaces, especially like mobile, desktop, stuff like that aren't JS. It's a shame that like the Ursus chat app is now kind of like defunct. I think the dude who did it didn't have enough time, but we like should have like, here's how you like do it easily on Swift or something like that. I think we should probably just like kind of distill it in that JavaScript example and look how that gets pulled apart, and then kind of copy that idiomatically to other languages. I think is going to be the fastest approach, but it's definitely something we need. Bigger takeaway is that like I sort of don't have to do the next part about like current. I'll do it a little bit with current community examples. We've already talked about them a lot, but if anyone hasn't seen it either, I think there's people are making now on Urbit kind of cool chat bots. Like can I share my screen on here? I can, right? Like, yeah. I'll just like, let me try like, Brave, wait, let me see, application window.
Might have a permission thing and might need to restart, but maybe it works.
No, is it sharing? Do people see? Yeah, I see you guys. Yeah. Yeah, so basically, let's go on to my like landscape. And if you go into a chat like, yeah, Mars Art Institute, you can people are doing stuff like, I'll just do like whatever, Matisse. You can type like, Zap Artbot Matisse. It goes to the chat. And so what just happened right there is that a chat bot built on top of like Mockrooks, like Robert's framework, went and like parsed this, fetched it, and then actually pasted the image and its like title into the chat automatically. Okay, so and you can easily then start to see how like, okay, if it's able to like monitor where this is, like what about if it starts making like a search indexer, and my Urbit starts to have like an agent that like builds up some kind of like index of what I've searched, or like if you're like in Bloody Shovel and here you can go public group, you can go to the Would You Bang channel, and everyone there's a polling bot that will vote on like whether the person in question should be banged. So there's like all these brilliant innovations that can happen at this point. But the point is that that's actually a direction that we're extremely open to hearing ideas on, and especially anything related to sort of better managing your data or like exposing it to you personally, in the form of like like search is like a big one on my mind. So if anyone's like interested in the general like problem of it and doing it on Urbit, very open to like jumping on a call or like chatting over Urbit and figuring out something there. So it's kind of a long-winded answer, but the answer is that for the specific thing, figure out the JS one, then definitely start porting it. And B, we need to. I'm really interested in finding ways to iterate on this like back-end work, because I think it's a super underrated right now. And we're really grateful for what you did. Kind of, it's easy. It's often easier just to show people what can be done than to like tell them you can do X on Urbit. And so it's really useful. I guess I can go.
I could just chip in real quick. It's going to be hard to have common actual patterns within the languages due to the differences of the languages, right? Like I'm building the Ruby equivalent of what Crux did right now, and I can use a lot of his conceptual stuff. And thank you again, Robert. It's really helped me just being able to see that kind of stuff. But once you get one layer down, mine is a totally different paradigm than his, right? But what we could standardize around, which would make the whole ecosystem is better, is on a consistent metadata about what the conceptual level of things are, right? To just give a simple example would be, is it a pier or is it a ship? Right? So the more that everybody uses the same words to mean the same thing, it will help us stay in sync over time, right? Such that, you know, I don't call a channel something, you know, like we just should have consistent of what does this word mean within.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you are you in the foundation chat right now, Winter?
I don't think so. No.
I should, or I don't. Maybe I'm an admin. I have to check. I probably Josh like did that without me knowing, but I should add you just because like talk about it a bit, but we could also then start thinking about things like, okay, how can we make this into like just like a mini little project of like write up all the words you can like think of on those lines, put them there, and then we do have the kind of bandwidth to like sort of surface that or put it on the website or even make a document of like this is how to talk about Urbit. Because I'm thinking back to when I was like more of a noob, and like that was actually definitely a thing, figuring out what a peer was, and it's even still not standardized whether the peer is like the ship's directory or whether it's like the directory / home when it's mounted, and like it's all these little, every one of those little gaps is like 10 to 1,000 minutes that someone spends not knowing, and those like add up a lot.
Right. So
yeah, I agree. Totally. I had a couple more notes, but those were mostly things that it's like all stuff that we've like literally hit already. And where it is, I came up in the order. So, and also I've been talking for a while now. So I'm gonna stop that in terms of like, you know, formal presentation. If anyone has other questions, like I'm good to stick around a bit or hang out. Kind of the jam. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Fabian, for doing it. Like it's really, yeah, I want to both get more interaction in video and chat on Urbit and possibly figure out ways to make it, just modes of interaction to make it even more informal throughout the day and happening. I remember when I used to play poker, we would just like go on Skype voice calls while we played and just have everyone like going in the background. And there still seems to be like a huge market for that with like Clubhouse, as people just like leaving it on as kind of like a poor man's podcast. And I want to think of how to potentially do more of that, because as I said, I think there's a fair amount of energy that can be transmitted better with things like voice than just in text. And like, it's going to be really important to make Urbit work to have like kind of essentially stronger connections, so that people feel worse about dropping off the face of the earth, so that people potentially like work together on projects more or do stuff like socially. I'm as I said, I'm a full-on like virtual maximalist. Like we're entering this era, and people need to like, it's not going to happen automatically. And if we don't like really make it better, we're just going to be stuck being like, you know, offline, but a little bit worse. So yeah, I'll close it with like, you know, with saying that.